Well, in full transparency, I hated Jeff Jarrett. As a wrestling fan, I was annoyed by his promos, his entrances, his matches. I even referred to him as the human fast forward button because
Oh
if there
boy.
was a chance to just skip it, I would rather.
Hey everybody, it is Sportskeeda Wrestling. I am Kev Kellam. More importantly, if you don't know that face, you definitely know that voice. That is Conrad Thompson, the Podfather of adfreeshows.com. Something to Wrestle with Bruce Pritchard. 83 weeks with Eric Bischoff. What happened when with Tony Schiavone? Kurt Angle show, and now we're going to add yet another one. Another reason why you may be upsetting people in your personal life, Conrad Thompson, is you launch a new show with Jeff Jarrett called My World. Conrad, how are you doing?
I'm great, man. But you did miss Arn and grilling JR.
I was gonna say there's probably 2 or 3 that I'm missing that I didn't even get it in there, you know. And
7 days
at
a
me,
week, baby. Monday through Sunday. Here we go.
Monday through Sunday. How do you balance all this? Because this is so much content to put out at one time, and also content with talent that has their own lives, their own schedules. You have people in opposing wrestling companies. Is there a conflict in doing it? It's a lot to do.
There is a lot to do, but no, we've got a great support system. We've got 2 researchers, we got a graphics guy, we got a video guy, we got 2 social media guys. We've got a really good crew who do everything from YouTube to merch and an attorney. And so we've got a real full-time crew now. And that support system means that I don't have to do everything.
That helps,
So
right?
I load up a little bit every Saturday morning and every Sunday morning. So usually from about 7 to 1 on both days, I'm just checked out. So my wife knows you have Conrad from 1 on, but before that, he's busy. And then a couple of days during the week, I'll have to do a few things like you and I are doing here. But by and large, I can just go be Conrad the mortgage guy Monday through Friday, which is good.
That's crazy. It's just it's an inspiring workload that you've taken on. This new show you're doing with Jeff Jarrett. This isn't somebody I apparently was on board for an idea. Obviously, who'd be on board for interviews and different things like that. I've been able to interview Jeff, and he's pretty transparent. But how long did it take to get Jeff on board with this, or was it easier when he saw the success you had with all the other wrestling luminaries you've worked with?
Well, in full transparency, I hated Jeff Jarrett. As a wrestling fan, I was annoyed by his promos, his entrances, his matches. I even referred to him as the human fast forward button because
Oh
if there
boy.
was a chance to just skip it, I would rather. And then, Bruce started singing that stupid song on Something to Wrestle. And so I thought, hey, how cool would it be since Jeff's going to be down in Orlando for our first live show? Why don't you try to call and see if you can get Jeff to come sing the song? And so Bruce got him to agree. And I got to hang out with him in the green room before the show. And I thought, man, I like this guy. And so I realized, wait a minute, he was a heel on TV. I was supposed to hate him. So he did his job. And so he fooled me. And so anyway, we had a chance to get to know each other a little bit there. And then fast forward, we did Starrcast together. He was the guy who put me in touch with Fight, so fans all over the world could watch Starrcast from home. And that was a really fun journey. And the entire time we're doing that, we're talking pretty regularly. I'm pestering him. Hey, man, we should do a podcast because I got to step out of. I don't want to talk about guitar shots and figure fours and Fargo struts. I want to talk about growing up and there being, vignettes shot in your basement where you live because your dad's a promoter. And I want to talk about Memphis, and I want to talk about Dallas, and I want to talk about walking out on Vince the first time. And I want to talk about the hold up, and I want to talk about Russo and Hogan and Bash at the Beach. And I want to talk about getting fired on TV. And then the whole TNA thing, the first TNA show happened, I don't know, 3 miles from my house. So I was there and I was fascinated with the story of this upstart wrestling company. And I read his dad's book the day it came out, and I was just fascinated with his story. And I kept peppering him, and the timing wasn't right. He did the Global Force thing, and then he did the Impact thing, and then he did the WWE thing. And now there was an opportunity where all of a sudden, I guess with COVID, and he had a chance to watch The Last Dance with Michael Jordan. And that was what got him thinking, hey, there really could be good content here. And I think he thought, well, people want to hear Bruce's stories because he does impressions and he was Vince's right hand man. And people want to hear Eric's stories because he created the NWO and Goldberg happened on his watch and Nitro and all that. And in his head, they don't want to hear my stories. But he saw the way Jordan responded and was just, I don't know, he owned the screen during the last dance. And because Jeff's such a big basketball fan, he thought, man, this is it. We got to do it. So we started talking more and more. And it didn't hurt that I knew that Jeff still had some old wrestling belts. And you see behind me, I happen to collect that. So I would pepper Jeff often about belts, but really I was trying to get him to do a podcast. And eventually we did a deal for a belt. And what do you know? We did a deal for a podcast at the same
There
time.
you go. There you
Yeah.
go. You you would have got something out of the conversation either way. Like, yeah. You brought up Starrcast, an incredible series of events you've launched. Obviously, the interest is growing for live events to come back. WWE is reportedly making moves to somehow set that up again to get themselves back to the road. Obviously, WrestleMania was kind of their first foray back into it, and executives say it will happen when we do it. It's the right time. AEW has expressed that, yes, at some point in 2021, we're going to be back on the road. So then the conversation becomes, when are we going to get another Starrcast? Are we going to get another Starrcast? But I know you've expressed the arduous journey of putting on an event at this scale. I attended the first one and the second one in Chicago. It is something else. It is worth the money. It is worth the trip out. But it is definitely a lot of work. Am I wrong?
No, you're exactly right. It is a lot of work. And right now, while everyone would still have to be socially distanced to be comfortable, it's a lot of work for a lot less money. So I don't know that it's as viable right now this year. I would rule out a Starrcast under any circumstance this year, but I do have a hope that we would be able to do at least one more. I do know that AEW is doing their own sort of fan fest at Double or Nothing down in Daly's Place in Jacksonville on Saturday. So that'll be fun, but it won't be Starrcast. And I'm not anti doing it. I just don't feel like we have enough information or the people are all the way comfortable yet. So I'm not in a rush to do it. But when we do it, I have already been in loose conversation with people even back before COVID of where they said, hey, I know I didn't do Starrcast before, but I'd really like to do the next one. So I've got some soft commitments from some big names in the industry who would really like to just do something different and do something special. And I think by the time we bring it back around, people are going to be excited.
Absolutely. Like I said, when I attended them, they were absolutely fantastic. And there were some events at it that caught me off guard. The roast of Bruce Pritchard is probably one of the funniest things I've ever seen live. And I've been doing comedy for 10, 11 years. Please do more of those. I know you have some great people contributing as well to all these different events. Well worth it if it happens again here.
Thank you.
Now, you have an intimate knowledge of the wrestling industry right now. It is in a very different place than it was when you started getting more involved with it on the podcast side of things. AEW has really opened up the market. We heard just a few days ago about Daniel Bryan's contract expiring. Some people think he'll stay with WWE. Some people think he won't. It is a different time for the talent in this company and probably even everyone else in the industry at that level of trying to get on a televised wrestling company. What's your take on it? For lack of a phrase, chat me up on it. What is the state of wrestling right now? Because it is completely different than when you got this involved with it a few years ago.
Well, I mean, I think Impact's on the right track. I mean, if you see the pay-per-view buy numbers, it seems like, they're doing as good as they have in several years. So that's great.
Yeah.
And I'm anxious to see New Japan, start running on a wider scale and things get more back to normal. It felt like they had a ton of momentum. And of course, COVID hurt some of that, like everybody. And yeah, I mean, there's even opportunities for independent shows. I think Game Changer Wrestling is doing a show in Wyoming. Like, I wouldn't have ever called that, but good for them. So yeah, there's a big opportunity right now for a lot of guys. And I think that while it sucks to see people lose their jobs, that creates a new lease on life for a lot of those talents who are fresh off WWE programming. And it'll be interesting to see over the next few months how that shakes out. I'm not going to say it feels like the Monday Night War again, but I am going to say that those folks have an opportunity to really hit the reset button. And I've always felt like, you sort of have to make a deal with the devil, not the right phrase there, but when you go to work with WWE, you sacrifice a little bit of your creative freedom and hopefully you do that for a gargantuan sum of money. But I think eventually you get, you finally quote unquote make it and you get there financially and you're secure and you're like, well, this is, gosh, I wish I could still do this or that. And now those folks have that opportunity to do that. And so a lot of those guys are probably having more fun and doing just fine on their own. You know, I'm talking about guys like Brian Myers and Matt Cardona. I mean, those guys, everything they touch turns to gold because they're hard workers. They love wrestling. They love the fans, and the fans know that. And they weren't allowed to have that sort of relationship with fans when they were with WWE, but they can now. So even though it feels like on the one hand, yeah, but all these people just got let go. Well, man, they're going to go do great stuff because to your point, it is a different landscape now. There
Mhm.
are more opportunities. And I know that a lot of people online say, oh, well, wrestling's not as good as it's ever been because less people than ever are watching. Okay, that may be true, but they're invested more. And
Yeah.
what I mean is when I first started advertising my mortgage company, I advertised on a big, like I guess we'll call it like a hot FM. So they're playing a lot of like current pop stuff. And it was the biggest station in the market, but it was very expensive and it didn't work for me. I didn't get a return. But then I was called on by a tiny heritage sports talk AM station and it was very affordable. But in my head, I'm thinking, how many people are even listening to that? I did my first commercial and my phone lines lit up. And so I learned right then it's not about how many people are seeing your product or hearing your product. What really matters is how many people are engaged in listening or learning about your product. And, you know, if you're just casually watching, but you're not buying anything, you know, there is some value there. But when you're actually invested and you're supporting it with your wallet, now you've got something. So these companies that are selling, you know, streaming services or merch opportunities or whatever the case may be, if you're voting with your wallet, that's how you really support your favorite wrestling company now more than ever, especially with talents and the whole split that like Pro Wrestling Tees does with talent all over the country. It's revolutionized the way that whole thing happens. I mean, they've even got a stand up comedy arm now, and they're going to continue to grow that because it's just a great business model. And it is a great time to be a wrestling fan, but it's also a great time to be in the business of professional wrestling.
And it's opened things up. And then you see, you know, WWE was able to benefit and sign these billion-dollar deals with new
Yeah.
TV companies. And it's good for the big ones. It's good for the little ones. It's good for everybody in between. And you enter it knowing all these different people in a slightly more personal way, in a slightly more professional way. You get these stories from people. What's the craziest story you've ever gotten out of anyone on your podcast that you're like, I thought we were going to get this, but we got something completely different. And you've gotten some wild ones from Bruce. You've gotten some crazy ones from Jim Ross. Arn Anderson is probably opened up more to you than maybe many other people he has in the media world. But what are some of those stories you heard where like, I thought we were going to get this and it went a completely different way?
Well, man, that's happened a lot. I mean, one of the biggest ones was, well, let me give you a Bruce example. When they lost power at In Your House, Beware of Dog, I just assumed Vince McMahon would have a classic meltdown like we've all heard about. I mean, we've
Mhm.
heard this guy gets mad at sneezes. So in my head, when the whole show was really screwed, his pay-per-view and everything is just circling the drain immediately. And there's nothing he can do about it. He didn't flip out. He was calm. And that just was like, wait a minute, what? How do you reconcile this over the top behavior? But then in this case, no big deal. And then, you know, with Eric Bischoff, we did, I don't know, probably 40 pages of notes once about the whole Bret Hart saga in WCW. And we specifically talked about the contract offer that Eric made to Bret in 1996, where he famously made his decision on Raw in October and Eric says, nope, never happened. Never sent that contract. But so many other people, from Dave Meltzer to great friend of the show, TJ Wilson, said, oh, yeah, it happened. And Bischoff doubled down and said, show me the contract and I'll eat it live on the air. And nobody's produced it. And so it's like my whole story, the narrative I had in mind for all the research was about that contract. And now it didn't happen. But Jeff Jarrett's got something coming up on episode 2 where we talk about when Vince fired him live on TV on maybe the most famous Raw Nitro ever on March 26, 2001. And his reaction to that, I was not prepared for. We just recorded it yesterday, and I'll never forget when he said what he said. I thought, that can't be real. And we continued to talk, and no, he really believed something totally different. So, it's happened a few times, but that's what makes this so fun is these guys have not told those stories before. Everybody else tells their story, and now it's time to hear it sort of straight from the horse's mouth, as they like to say.
It's been a pleasure speaking with you. So much going on, as I even mentioned. I couldn't even remember all the shows you're doing every single week, Conrad. Obviously, adfreeshows.com is where you can go and get them first before they're available on public podcast apps like the Westwood One app, as well as Apple and anywhere else you get your podcasts.